All right, guys. Today I am once again joined by Will and Will, who not too long ago just got through their first mini extravaganza. So congratulations on that, guys. That was a absolute blast to witness.
Well, thanks. It was certainly a lot of work to kind of coordinate and put on, but we were really excited to get the chance to do something in the middle of the pandemic, and we had so much fun putting on virtual Gen Con last year, and learned so much from doing that we were like, we can do this. We can make our own thing and kind of fill the void for a little bit for everyone who plays any of the AMG games now. So it was fun. It was fun. It definitely felt like a con on Sunday. I was like, I am exhausted, and I didn't even really move from my chair.
But with the schedule that you guys kept up with, I can definitely see why you were exhausted by the end of it.
It's always a party.
Yeah, it was. There was an after party and everything, so it was a party. That's how those things work.
Exactly. Unfortunately, though, you guys are not here to give us any more spicy details or anything like that. But rather, there is an update coming to the banned and restricted list.
That is correct, and very exciting indeed.
Yeah, which is very exciting. There's some spicy stuff in that new list. But before we get into that and get too far ahead of ourselves, if you guys wouldn't mind, for somebody who's just now hearing about the banned and restricted list, lay some groundwork for what the banned and restricted list is and why there is one for MCP, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so the banned and restricted list it's two lists, really. It's a banned list and a restricted list. Things that are on the banned list cannot or should not be played in organized play events. And things that are on the restricted list, you may pick two of them to include in your roster or squad when playing in organized play events. Why do we have these lists? Well, as a game grows and its horizon continually is pushed out and it does all sorts of cool new things, we cannot, as developers and as a company, always plan for everything. So the power levels of things may shift, the value of certain things may shift. And as we do that, sometimes we need a way to sort of rein things back in and cool things off a little bit. And these lists give us the option to do that. Banning things is very rare. We're going to end up with two things on our ban list. Not two new things, two total things. And restricting is a little more common, but still pretty rare. And really the goal for these is to promote the best play experience possible for the players. We want players to be playing enjoyable games, fun games with the things that they want to play with. And that's always the goal of Crisis Protocol and AMG in general, is to make sure that when you experience our games and you play the things that we have created, that you have fun and you get to do what you want and you don't feel hamstrung overly so by certain options that are inside of the game. And then that is sort of what the banned and restricted list aims to address and do.
Awesome. And so while I'm sure people in the audience here are very excited to hear what the new things are and for the hot takes and everything, I first want to go back and look at some of the other things that are already on the list and pick your brains about that, because I feel like it's a great opportunity to. First off, Drop Off was banned, and one of the main reasons that you guys kind of talked about and mentioned was the limitations it can place on characters when you're developing new characters. And you gave Cable as a prime example of that. And now, of course, we've actually seen Cable. So what is it about Cable's kit that made Drop Off have to go to that list, or what, I guess, was your thought process with him being kind of that final straw?
There were two primary elements that factored into the whole thing. So when designing Cable, it was my intention that he was going to be a really range focused character. He was going to have a lot of his kit devoted to being able to deal damage from different ranges. That included his massive throw that he has, primarily his plasma rifle. And then of course he has his area attack, which is kind of once he gets up close and personal and he gets this big like psychic blast that he gets to do. However, on top of that, one of the things that I like, in my personal opinion, you can't make the cable that we were making without this is the body slide by one, which means that he had to have a teleport. So a lot of the design is centered around, you look at, okay, he's going to be a slow moving character, but he's on a bigger base. So that kind of meters out. And then he has the ability to do that body slide effectively every turn if he wants. So now he's become very mobile on top of the range 5. These are all really core in my feelings to making Cable feel like the Cable that we've seen in the comics, and especially from the, the 90s era kind of time period that we were really focusing on for these initial X-Men characters. And with all of that said, once we started going into playtest, we found that many of these things, in combination with drop off, his increased power gain, that kind of stuff, started to really cause issues, which I'm sure Pagani can talk about a little bit.
Sure. And I think there's sort of the last part of that puzzle, and forgive me if I get the name wrong. I'm pretty sure the card is called Cat and Mouse, but it had many names through playtesting, which is the one that allows an X-Force character to place within range 2 after deployment, combined with body slide, combined with drop off, combined with, say, Angela, or some other larger base, fast moving character with flight, really lets Cable go pretty much anywhere he wants on the table, and then make 2 to 3 attacks on like the second activation of round 2. And whereas some movement like this can be achieved through other characters in other ways, right? It's I don't know. It was sort of the last straw for drop off for me, combined with, of course, all of the other things that were happening with drop off at the time.
Yeah.
So like, there was just a lot going on with drop off, and Cable was sort of like the last little push where it was like, I don't really want to change how Cable functions to accommodate for drop off and these other plays that people are doing, when we could just remove drop off from the game and not worry about any of this anymore, and make the coolest and most interesting Cable and tactic cards for Cable that we could. And that's the option that we chose.
And that was really, we used Cable as kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, in terms of, once we started looking at it, okay, if drop off remains in the game, what do we have to do to Cable? And we had already made, and I think we talked about this in the last go around, we'd already made adjustments to characters based on drop off's existence, the high number of variables that it did, the different plays you could do. None of those adjustments, I think, overall hit the mark that it would have on Cable, where it was like, this character is just not the character that I believe encompasses the comic book Cable that we want to present on the table. And for us, when we're approaching these characters, when we're looking at the design, when we're focused on development, the core goal is always to make sure that we're being as true as possible to the character in that place, in that design, as possible. So we take alterations that simply move us away from that really seriously. And with Cable, there were so many things that were going to have to be adjusted that we were just going to make a different Cable. And, everything else on top of it was, Cable's awesome. The problem isn't Cable. The problem is this one interaction, when played out exactly this way, leads to this bad play experience. That was kind of the capstone to the whole drop-off issue, which is, as the game continued to expand, as more of those plays became possible, we had to continually adjust around it. And at the end of the day, our analysis and our belief was that people would rather have really bomb-ass characters from Marvel than they would to have one card work the way it always had from the core set, right?
Yeah.
And so that led us to say, losing drop-off opens up such a wide range of possibilities, allows us to maintain our core ethos of making these characters as awesome as they should be, and improves the game experience overall by eliminating this weird one corner case tactic. And as I think we'll talk about when we talk about the new list, you'll see that philosophy of cards wind up on this list because they have one interaction that kind of overshadows everything else, and that is a problem.
Sure. Absolutely. Will Pagani, any final thoughts for it?
No, I think we're good.
Fair enough. Cool. And before we move on to those new things, it's also worth mentioning nothing is coming off of the current banned and or restricted list. Just nothing there that you guys saw needed changes or any thought process behind that.
Yeah, so we went through the current list, as we will do every time we do revisions in the list, right? And discuss whether or not cards can come off. Now, obviously, the ban list drop off is there for a very specific reason. I'll say it. I doubt drop off ever comes off the ban list. I think that's very, very unlikely to happen ever. Because of, everything we just discussed, right?
Yeah.
99.99% sure.
That's the end of that discussion, right? Is sort of like drop off is probably never coming back. But restricted cards, I think, are much more likely to come off the list. We sat down and we had a couple meetings and we chatted about it for quite a while about the current cards on the list. Could we remove Brace for Impact from the restricted list? We didn't just create. We released Magneto, for example, has a big throw. She-Hulk has a big throw. If you want to get particularly spicy, you could play Agents of Smash and throw size 5 things at people with She-Hulk and Hulk. All of these want Brace for Impact to be more common in the game, right? We also have Cable's throw, right? So there's a lot of big throws that are coming out right now. So we discussed, like, should we or could we unrestrict Brace for Impact? We ended up with the answer being no, because the reason that Brace for Impact is on the list is because of its sort of ubiquitous nature. And if we unrestrict it, do we just see it in every roster going forward again? And I think the answer is yes. And if the goal is to make that not happen, which is the goal of the restricted list, right? For some of these very generically useful cards that we discussed last time when we created the restricted list, I guess, that is still true now. So we should not unrestrict that card. We did discuss things like, should we unrestrict either Medpack or Patch Up, right? They're very similar cards. They both heal things, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Should we unrestrict one of those two cards? We came to the same conclusion. No, we don't think so, because if we do, then players will just end up playing both of them again, like they did back in the olden days, right? Doomed Prophecy is still Doomed Prophecy, right? that hasn't changed. We actually made more characters that are very strong with Doomed Prophecy, not sort of reduced or reduced the effective power level of Doomed Prophecy. So that one needs to stay. So we go through each card sort of like that and reassess it as we go. Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the 5th card is. Field Dressing, yes. Field Dressing. Still Field Dressing, right? Like, still very powerful, still very common, possibly even more powerful with All You've Got, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Not All You've Got. Yeah, All You've Got. I always get All You've Got and No Matter the Cost mixed up, because they're kind of like thematically.
They're similar in terms of like theme.
Yeah, the theme and the name could be sort of switched on those two, so I always get the two names mixed up.
Yeah, and I guess with that, let's talk about some of the new additions to the list. And you've already mentioned All You've Got, so that is being added to which list?
That is being added to the restricted list.
And the reasoning behind that one going to the restricted list, it falls into the same reasoning as Doomed Prophecy, which Pagani mentioned when he was going through the last list. It is a very strong card. It obviously can have big swing terms, especially in the later game, when potentially dazing or KOing one of your characters to get an extra activation out of them can earn you that last amount of VPs, can push somebody off the point, can take out that key character to allow you to win. Of course, it pairs really well with Doomed Prophecy as well, because then you get a really big swing term. So you see people taking it together, that kind of stuff. In the end, it is a very strong card. It takes management, it takes tactics, and it takes, I think, a little bit of luck to make sure that you set up properly, because there's counterplay to it if you know what's coming. That said, we, for many of the same reasons why we put Doomed Prophecy on the list, All You Got wound up on the list as well. One of the big ones that I'll talk about, Pagani can talk a little bit more about, like the specific play examples and stuff in terms of power level. But I think for us, or from my perspective, one of the biggest reasons to put this card on the restricted list, much like Doomed Prophecy, is that when you know what's coming, when you know what All You've Got does, you can play against it, right? You can make choices that say, okay, I'm expecting that this will happen. I'm going to mitigate the risk. Same with Doomed Prophecy. If you've seen Doom Prophecy, you know, don't cluster a bunch of your characters around that Black Widow who's got rapid fire, because she's going to pop Doom Prophecy and probably daze your entire team.
Or even Deadpool now.
Or even Deadpool now. Or
Yeah.
or potentially a Sin. Or, you know, there are many other characters that are coming.
Punisher, there's a plenty, yeah.
There's plenty who can pull off this kind of like combo. And again, there's a significant drawback, and there's an opportunity cost now, which I think is the Pagani angle on it in terms of why Doom's Prophecy goes on the list, why All You've Got goes on the list. But from a general like philosophy, one of the things that we try to do, that our goal is with Marvel Crisis Protocol, is create a game that can bring anybody to the table. If you love Marvel and you have an interest in hobby miniatures, you want to start diving into the hobby, we hope that Crisis Protocol is set up in a way that allows you the easiest entry to it. We made choices with the design and how the game flows. We've taken our complexity budget with that in mind, which we've talked about in other things in terms of where we spent that complexity, where we didn't, why we made some of the development and design choices for the core rules and mechanics that we did, why we approach characters in the way we did. At the end of the day, our goal is to make the best game possible. If you make the best game possible, you bring in the widest audience, right? Whether you play once a month, if the rules are clean, concise, and very well balanced, you're going to have a blast. Mm-hmm. If you play 3 hours every night because you're going to take yourself to the peak competitive skill level, you're going to have a good time because the game rules are tight, clean, concise, and you can really maximize your creative problem solving and your tactical strategy acumen with it. You don't have to stop and say, well, what about this weird corner case? What do we do here? This is very undefined. We're going to determine a game based on our argument as to line of sight, for instance. Can you be seen? Can you not be seen? What does this measurement mean? That kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But when you bring all of these people together into this awesome community, what happens is, and we talked about this last time too, is that those different mentalities, everybody brings something different to the game. What do you want out of the game? Do you want to have a really zany time throwing all these rando characters that you were like, but have no reason to be together on a table and just see what happens? Are you trying to, increase your skill level by maximizing your list efficiency and doing all this other stuff, right? Friction will happen between players because at the end of the day, everybody is coming to the game to have fun. A lot of the times players forget that there's another person involved in that recipe. And that can lead to the friction exacerbating. So, we talked about this a little bit during the mini extravaganza development panel, which was a blast. And I hope people really enjoyed kind of watching the behind the scenes of how we think about these things go in. But you run into significant problems when you have players who only look at the table and don't look at the person across from them. We can't solve that issue. We can't solve the fact that everyone's bringing different things, different skill levels, and all that to the game. But what we can do is we can kind of like identify those things that can feel really negative to somebody and put a limelight on them, right? Doom Prophecy in itself has counterplay. But if you don't know anything about Doom Prophecy because you're not super into like the online discussions, or you only play casually every once in a while, you may not be aware of it. By putting things on the restricted list, not only do we kind of address some of the power level by increasing opportunity costs, but more importantly to me, what we do is we bring recognition and understanding to players that, hey, you should know what this does. Like, why is it on the list? Oh, now we get to have a conversation about it. Now you're going to see that it's there. You might do a little research. And so when that combination happens, now instead of it being like well, that was just not fair, I got totally bamboozled. Bamboozled, one of my favorite words because it's very fun to say.
Good word. Also
a really important development word because anytime you feel bamboozled, you don't have fun, right? Bamboozling is bad, even though it's fun to say. So what happens is that Doomed Prophecy and now All You've Got change from a bamboozled experience to a you pulled it off, right? Like, look at how it all came together and it worked out. It becomes the Rube Goldberg machine of like, I still might not be super happy that I got, knocked down by it, right? Like, that was really rough. But at the same time, I can celebrate your success because I knew what was coming. Like, I at least had some understanding that this is a thing, they're going to try to do it. Oh, you pulled it off, right? It's the same thing that happens when you spike a dice roll and you watch a Black Widow take out a Thanos because you just can't stop rolling like amazingly. and you go, oh, and everybody like freaks out and they lose their minds. And those are stories that you tell forever, and they become positive experiences, even though, the outcome for you might be considered a negative experience. And I think that's the magic of tabletop games in general, is that we create these communal experiences that are called fun together. And we do so in a way that means that one person traditionally has to lose and one person traditionally has to win. But again, by setting expectations, by trying to mitigate this friction, we can achieve the ultimate goal of every game, which is that everybody comes to the table and has an enjoyable time, creates a meaningful connection with the person across the table, and then is excited to come back and do it again.
Yeah, I agree. Also, from a from a game mechanics perspective, all you've got is on there, as Schick mentioned at sort of the beginning of his section, I guess, whatever you want to call it.
TED Talk.
Schick's TED Talk on the purpose of miniatures games, brought to you by the Gamers Guild, is opportunity cost, right? By adding more cards to this restricted list. We talked about this. Restricted list. Now it's in my brain. Is to increase the opportunity cost of these cards, right? Now it's no longer one tactic card slot. Now it's also one of your 2 reserve list slots. Did it again. Restricted list slots, right? Is to increase that opportunity cost, which you only get 2 cards from this list. If you're now trying to do a Doomed Prophecy All You've Got combo, that's 100% of your cards from the list. Yeah, and that's another cost. You can no longer take that med pack. You can no longer take that Brace for Impact that we talked about, right? So that can bring down the power level of a card by adding it to this list, because whereas you're not directly affecting that card's power level, you are affecting the overall squad or the overall roster's power level. And that's really the gameplay mechanic behind the restricted list. I just almost called it the reserve list for the 3rd time.
You got there.
It's in my brain now, and it's gonna live there forever. And we'll see.
Cool. So it makes sense. It very much falls in line with why Doom Prophecy, I feel like, as you guys have both kind of talked about, why those 2 are similarly positioned to be on that list, kind of be able to put a red flag on the card. Makes sense. Love it for the game's philosophy. But now we also have a new kind of card hitting the restricted list. And I will let you guys take it from there.
Nobody on these casts ever wants to say the name because it's so long. So we've added a crisis card, which I believe, once again, free recall here, is Panic Grips the City as Evacuation Efforts Continue, which I will just call Panic for the rest of this podcast. We restricted that card for a couple reasons. One of which is so I guess let's rewind for a second from talking about this card specifically and talk about its sort of design and development phase and its playtesting. When we created that card, we were very aware that it has an incredibly unique effect where you can pay power from a character to gain victory points. And it is really the only way in the game to do that without some other thing happening, right? Like you serve the throne, you have to Daze or KO the highest threat value enemy character to do it. There's dice rolls involved, there's positioning involved, there's all sorts of things involved. This is just, I pay 6 power, I get 2 points. And there's no randomness to it. Sure, you have to be holding the token, right? But like, that's Crisis Protocol. Like, you hold the token, like it's what you do, right? So I don't think that's a particularly relevant portion of that card, I guess. So that's a very unique part of that card. And when we made it, we were definitely very aware. We were like, well, this is a really powerful and strong thing. Should we make this card, right? And that's kind of always a development question of like, should we make this card? And the answer that we came up with was obviously yes, because the card exists and came out in this kind of thing. But to talk a little bit about why we make the card is unique and powerful effects are fun. right? That's one of the things that is exciting to play during a game. And as Schick said with All You've Got, right? Like when you have those powerful turns, that's really cool and really exciting and really fun. And this card, Panic, does that, right? When you get to evacuate your civilian token into space or whatever, or wherever they're evacuating to, or maybe you're not even evacuating them. Maybe you're the bad guys and you're stealing them away for your diabolical plans. Who knows? But when you get to do that, like that is a powerful effect that feels good to the player, and it creates a unique play experience. And that's kind of everything that we're about when we design things. So we decided, yes, let's do this. It's definitely a card that's been on our radar since its conception. And really what pushed it into this restricted list is sort of the ability of certain teams and certain squads to be able to play this crisis in a way where I can, in the first turn or two, score 3, 4, 5, 6 points. And then I can sort of disengage from my opponent back up onto the backfield of the table and just hang out for a couple turns and then evacuate my civilians and win the game. And that's not a very fun experience for anyone. That's not a powerful play. That's not exciting. And really, that's not what we want out of this scenario, this crisis, right? Is that kind of play. So why didn't we ban it versus restricting it? Well, at the moment, it is not a sort of big enough player, I guess, in the game to warrant a ban versus a restriction. And then once again, restricting it increases that opportunity cost. So what are these squads now missing out on when they do play this crisis? And more importantly, what are they missing out on when they don't play this crisis, right? Is now you're investing one of these 2 reserve list slots into a crisis that you may not even draw. And I think that is really what we talked about with opportunity cost. And always when we talk about the restricted list, we're going to talk about opportunity cost, right? So I think the opportunity cost of this crisis is now quite high. You're not getting as powerful tactic cards when you're playing with this crisis, and you may not even get the crisis. So I'm interested to see how that affects how people play with the crisis and what they do.
Yeah, absolutely, because there's a chance that you're not even going to get to pick your extracts, and even then it might be the card that you discard. So just one of your restricted slots, I almost said it's reserved, just disappears.
Let's see if we can get a Schick on it later.
I don't have the background you two do with reserved lists, so to me it's just like weird every time.
That is true. That is true. Yeah, so that's kind of what's going on with Panic, and it's certainly something that we'll keep an eye on, right? If it continues to become a popular strategy to do things like that, and it starts becoming sort of a very strong play, well, maybe perhaps at some point in the future it moves up a rank. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. And those are all of the additions to the restricted list.
Yep, just those 2.
And so there is then one new card joining Drop-Off on the ban list. And it's one that I have to say I kind of hoped was coming, kind of expected was coming, and that is, of course, Hired Muscle.
Yeah, it's a kooky card, right? Like it does weird things. Hired Muscle allows players to move around objective tokens, which is sort of the first time that that's existed, right? And I think when you first look at the card, it's very innocent, which is kind of an explanation of how the card was made, right? It's I get to move around some civilians. That's great. But in the end, what it turned out to be was a card that would, through combination with some other things, mostly characters that can generate multiple power per turn, or have very powerful defensive abilities that they can generate multiple power per turn to use, created some very aggressive turn 1 plays where players can move up the battlefield, move your opponent's civilian tokens towards your side of the table, pick up one of your opponent's civilian tokens even, and then possibly even move backwards again immediately to create some very, very safe plays. And that in itself, I think, is fine in terms of power level of the card. Like to me, that if that was all that was happening here, I think the card would not be banned. Those plays have ways to be dealt with. There are things that can deal with that kind of stuff. Um, but this is kind of where we get into like sticky situation number 2 for the card is how do we play against those strategies? Well, there are very specific things that are good against these strategies. I'm not going to list them. They have been discussed to death by the community. But there are counterplays, but they're very specific counterplays. And generally speaking, when we look at counterplay as an option to either balance or fix something, we want to see a good variety of options. And that is not what has really happened with Hired Muscle. First of all, one of the best counters to Hired Muscle is Hired Muscle. And that's not good. That does a lot of damage to things when we're talking about like the health of a game, right? If everybody feels that they have to play Hired Muscle, even if they don't want to play the Hired Muscle strategy, so that if someone else uses the Hired Muscle strategy, they can kind of counter the Hired Muscle strategy. That was a lot to say. Is not great because now we're taking away your choices as players. Say, hey, I want to play the cards that I want to play. I want to play the characters that I want to play. Now I have to play Hired Muscle, or I have to play one of these characters with their tactic card, or I have to play one of these characters that can deal with Hired Muscle. And now you're forced as a player to play these things that you don't necessarily want to play, right? And Crisis Protocol is really founded on this backbone of have fun, play what you want to play, enjoy the game, right? And if you can't play what you want to play, and we're going to get to the second here, the have fun part, Hired Muscle games, we see an overwhelming comment from people that they just were not fun. Like when the strategy goes off and the strategy happens, like neither player really enjoys it. And whereas I think like Doomed Prophecy and All You've Got, Shit got to talk about that experience of like, you did it, you did the thing and it was really cool and it was really fun. Like the Hired Muscle lines of play are not particularly fun for the player doing it, and they're certainly not fun for the player playing against it. And so that's kind of like those 3 things, right? Very powerful plays in the early game, very specific counterplay required, sort of limiting players' choices for how to deal with the strategy, and then also it's just not enjoyable. Those 3 things I think are really what earned the card its spot on the ban list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, to kind of just go into a little bit of like the how did we get here, right?
Sure.
Hired Muscle specifically, we talk a lot about our development timelines, and we are working, typically 18 months minimum ahead. So we do have a view to kind of the future of like what's coming next, and then there are things that get worked on in, unfortunately, as Pagani kind of talked about at the very start of this, we're not able to see the end point of the game. And that's one of the really cool things about getting to work on something creative and ever expanding, is that it continues to grow and evolve. But we can't always predict where those branches will grow. And sometimes they start to grow through a window and you got to clip them off. Hired Muscle at the time, we have a very decent and amazing playtest program where we're doing multiple cycles of testing because we have such long lead times and we're aware of this stuff. But at the end of the day, the permutations are never going to be equal to when something goes out in the wild and you see what happens. And on top of that, not everything is linear. So again, when you're working on a card like Hired Muscle and you think you have all of the information in front of you, the next month or the next cycle, new things come in and they kind of adjust what's going on with that. So it becomes one of those things where you're doing, we do everything we can. We work really hard to make sure that we're catching all of these corner cases and instances, and we have an amazing group of people helping us do that, who are very dedicated and passionate. But at the end of the day, we're all people. And just like in any kind of journey where you start at a baseline and you continually improve your skills, you're going to make mistakes. And when, these things get pointed out, when the Hired Muscle discussion began fervently even initially among the community, Pagani and I sat down, we talked about it. We put it on the table. We did a lot of testing internally with it. we kind of unlocked some of the strategies or looked at some of the strategies to counterplay against it. We talked more about what was coming in the pipe and would that solve it. And what we discovered was there are things coming out, some of which is in the Spider Foes block that's coming, that do help address the hired muscle thing. But at the end of the day, there just simply wasn't enough, we felt, in order to make that worthwhile. And the timeline was going to be longer than we wanted to be able to actually, like, if you wanted to start making counters to a thing, you can do that. This goes back to the cable problem again of now we're trying to shoehorn certain things in to adjust these things way down the line. Is that the decision you want to make? The answer for us is no, right? Because now we're not making true replicants of the characters from the comic pages to the game itself. And one of the great things about it, is I always point out, making mistakes is not fun at the time. Missing something is never an enjoyable experience to realize that, oh, this one got through. But you can either take that as a negative experience, or you can do what hopefully, the hobbyist mentality looks at it and say, okay, well, what do I learn from this? And the amount of data we're able to pull from something like drop off, what does that mean? How do we adjust that in the future? Something like hired muscle, what do we do in the future? And we talked a bit around this topic in the Crisis Protocol panel from an extravaganza. But one of the things is our philosophies on how we design team tactic cards, how to get the most out of them, how to make them reach what we want them to be, which team tactic cards I think we discussed in the previous banned and restricted stuff, and we've definitely talked about in other panels. They're meant to be these really powerful, exciting cinematic moments, the team ups, the character doing something outside of the norm for that one big push. Mm-hmm. All you've got, to go back to that card, it was in the Miles Morales and Gwen Stacy, the Ghost Spider and Spider-Man pack. And of course, thematically, it very much fits in with the Spider-Man mentality, right? I'm going to push myself to the absolute limit to save the day. And that's not something that you want to put on a character card that they can do all the time, but it's something that we see happen over and over in the storyline. So here's how we implement that in the game so that players have the tools to tell the awesome stories on the tabletop they want to tell. What we've learned, and what Hired Muscle, I think, has only enforced as we've learned more and more about the game, how it functions, and what to do with these cards, is that unaffiliated broad tactic cards typically are the ones that wind up kind of skewing things. And so we talked a bit in that panel about how, the focus has more shifted away from unaffiliated to how do we just make more cool affiliated specific or character specific cards that allow us to really do awesome things, but that have opportunity costs, because now you're getting locked into taking these characters for this affiliation, mm-hmm. or this specific character within this affiliation, those kinds of things. And this is all just part of the learning and the growth process. And as you kind of, get better at what you do and learn hard lessons, sometimes you get to apply that stuff in. And so, we said this the last time and it remains true. The goal is that we don't have to continue. Like, the goal is not to create things that get added to these lists. These lists are the solution for when we create things, and upon reflection, we realize that they are imbalancing the game in some way that we either missed when it comes to the ban list, or in ways that were not predictive, but can be solved through increasing opportunity costs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think the list continues to grow in a healthy way with that. None of these things are particularly unreasonable to me, and I'm mostly just happy that a couple of my favorite tactic cards have yet to make it on either of these lists.
Hopefully we can keep it that way.
Fingers crossed. I'm not sharing names.
Smart. It's wise. It's a wise man right here.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you for sharing. Anything else that you guys would like to say or explain for us?
Yeah, I think I just want to reiterate once again that, like, the goal of the restricted list and the ban list is to create sort of the healthiest version of the game for the community to play as possible. But I would also like to say that, like, if you really enjoy these cards and you and your friends are playing at home, at a store, wherever, you certainly do not have to follow this list, right?
Hmm.
Play with what you want to play with. Enjoy yourself. If you guys are having a good time out there, keep doing it. Like, we're not here to tell you how to play this game. I mean, we kind of are, but not this way. We gave you the rule book. Y'all have fun. So I guess that's like a big thing for me, right? Is this game is just as much yours as it is ours. And without the community and without all of y'all, we wouldn't be here either. So cheers.
Absolutely.
Just turn it off. No one's gonna beat that. Just push the button. We're done. Fade to black. We're out.
I guess then on that note, thank you all for watching and listening to us talk about the updated list that you can now find on Atomic Mass Games' website. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I will answer to the best of my ability. And if not, you can always point some questions also towards the rules forum, which is a great place for lots and lots of resources directly from Atomic Mass Games and approved moderators. But with that, thank you all for watching, and until next time, keep on gaming.
Bye.